Alright there, morning everyone. I hope you can hear me. If you can't, let me know and I will adjust volume settings and such like. We're here pretty much on time, which is nice. I was worried I wouldn't be able to get up in time to do this, but, here we go. Alright, so for the first couple of hours of today, we're going to be looking at some Atari 2600 games. My original plan for this was to look at stuff in the Atari Vault and Atari Flashback releases on PS4 and PC. But I've changed my mind on that. I've decided to have a look through some ROMs for some slightly more obscure stuff that you might not have come across before. Thing is, with 2600 games, a lot of these releases tend to have the same games in them all the time. Probably because a lot of them, there's copyright issues and all sorts of other things like that that make it difficult to re-release them. So you tend to find all the old Atari games come out all the time because Atari keep making money off them. A lot of the Activision ones have been re-released a few times over the years as well. But then there's all these other games, about sort of 500 or 600 I've got in the library here, that you just don't see on compilations. So I'm going to share some stuff that you might not have seen before today, beginning with this one that I'd never heard of before, called The Earth Dies Screaming from 20th Century Fox. So this is a pretty simple space combat game. Actually reminds me quite a bit of Star Raiders 2, which came out quite a bit later on the Atari 8-bit. In that you have sort of control over your left and right lateral movement. You can move forwards and backwards as well. And you're going over the surface of the rolling surface of a planet to kind of move up and down as well. You know, the game takes care of vertical aiming for you. You just have to sort of line up with the enemies and shoot them. And as with most 2600 games, the basic aim of this is just to survive as long as possible and get a high score. In this case, your sort of progress and lives or such like is measured by energy that I can't quite work out if it tells you anywhere on the screen, but every time you get hit by an enemy or any time an enemy lands on the planet or does something like that, you'll see the screen will flash. When you get low on energy, there's sort of a warning alarm sound as well, so you know you're getting close to the end of the game. Other than that, it's just a case of flying around shooting shit. I actually really like the score display in this, the way it sort of rolls around like an old tape counter or something. There we are, there's the warning sound, so I'm probably getting close to the end of this game here. It's really hard to dodge that stuff. It's like, even if you get it right to the edge of the screen. I forget offhand what year this came out, but I think it was actually reasonably early in the sort of general life of video gaming. About 1983, I want to say or so. It's quite impressive for that time. It's especially for a 2600 game. I mean, we're used to 2600 games looking very primitive, and this has actually got some pretty neat effects going on. It's got lots of colour. It's got that neat sort of pseudo 3D effect on the planet surface down below. It's got lots of sound effects. Oh, there we go. Dead. $24,325. Let's give that one more go. Since there's no one here and then no one listening to me. So if you're just joining us, this is The Earth Dies Screaming by 20th Century Fox for the Atari 2600. I always used to really enjoy these sort of cockpit view shooters when I was a kid. Like, I mentioned Star Raiders 2 before, that was a particular favourite, along with the last Starfighter prototype that came before that. I don't know if this actually had anything to do with Star Raiders, but it's certainly very similar in terms of execution and presentation, so I'd be interested to find out a bit more and see if there's actually any connection between the projects. So even those sound effects are similar. The sort of boop 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 on the radar, and the sound of the engines. Although that said, that's the standard sort of jet engine sound that you hear on pretty much every 2600 and Atari 8-bit game, so it's the old distorted noise channel. Those are sneaky bastards as they disappear. Oh, running out of energy again. Am I going to beat last time? What was it, about 24,000? That's the only slight bummer about a lot of these games, is because the system had so little memory. It was often that you didn't really get a chance to store your high scores, and obviously saving them was completely out of the question because things like battery backup and that sort of thing wasn't introduced until much later on Nintendo systems and home computers and so on. So if you wanted to record your high scores, then you just had to write them down and take a photograph or so on. And even then, taking a photograph wasn't as easy as it was today. Just taking a digital camera or your phone and snapping a shot of the screen. It would be a case of getting an actual camera and trying to get a reliable picture of a flickering CRT, which is not easy, as most of my family can attest, because we used to take screenshots for a computer magazine. Nope. I think I beat last time's score. But anyway, there we go. That is The Earth Dies Screaming by 20th Century Fox. So, let's see what's next on my list. Oh, we got a little bit of a write-up here. This piece of software is called Launchbox, by the way, if you've never seen it before. It's an excellent way of organising your ROM files and so on. It actually automatically pulls in things like box art, cartridge art, that kind of thing, and also some write-ups from various databases, including Wikipedia and some game-specific databases as well. So if you're into your retro gaming or your ROM collecting and so on, then yeah, it's well worth downloading this and setting it up. This is the free version. There is a premium version. You can either pay for a year or an ongoing subscription for, and that gives you some extra features, things like being able to set up playlists, and it's got a big screen mode, which is designed for things like if you're making a custom arcade cabinet, or if you're making a PC that's specifically for retro gaming and so on. Gives you a nice interface to choose your ROMs from and so on. But otherwise, this interface works really well. So there was a write-up on that one then. You are a space destroyer defending Earth against the Trillions. The Trillions are using attack bases to launch kamikaze satellites and Trillion fighters at Earth. Yeah, that's pretty much all it says, really. It is from 1983, I was right. So that was sort of around the time of the great video game crash, which is probably why we haven't heard of it. So I'm guessing it didn't sell brilliantly. Serious Software, they did quite a few things on both the 2600 and the 8-bit, so yeah, reasonably prolific developer there. But yeah, okay, moving on. Next game we're going to look at is Cracked, or Crackhead. Now, the first time I actually played this was on the Atari ST. Atari went through a short phase of doing sort of budget tier releases of a lot of their old games, sort of updated for the 16-bit era, and Cracked was one of them. I remember it quite fondly because it was a very simple game, as you'll see in a minute, but it involves sort of shooting. It's kind of a light gun shooter, but it uses a cursor rather than an actual light gun. And, well, let's take a look. I'll show you. I'm going to put it on insane difficulty because I tried normal last night and it was very easy. So let's try it on insane and see how it goes. So the basic aim of Cracked is to protect your eggs in all those nests from these various things that are popping in and trying to steal them. And you do that by shooting them. And if an egg falls, you grab it by, well, shooting it again. And then you shoot again to drop it, hopefully back over a nest. And you see, in this case, you can spot which ones are carrying the eggs because they start flashing. Now, on the Atari ST version I was talking about before, there was enough sort of detail on the screen to be able to see who was carrying what. But in this case, they've taken the approach of just making the enemy flash instead. Which makes sense because we haven't got a lot of resolution to play with here, so... So this apparently got released for the 7800, but this 2600 version never made it to actual publication. So it's not sort of quite finished, if you like. There's only 3 different levels in this compared to, I think, 6 they were in the full version. They were on the Atari ST version. Again, each level had a lot more detail and so on. But again, you can see this isn't a bad-looking 2600 game. There's a lot of colour, a lot of use of that sort of stripy effect to make it look like there's sort of gradients of tone and so on. We just got single colour sprites for the enemies. I have vivid memories of the Atari ST version of this level. Had enemies called dunglings in them that were just basically lumps of shit that wandered around, and you shot them and they went like fart or something like that. And obviously, as a teenager, I found that very amusing. It was so entertaining that my friends and we developed a little cartoon character called the Toilet People while we were at school. It was basically based on the dunglings, and it was just a big sentient lump of poo that would pop out the toilet and yell at you. This bonus stage, I don't know if it's supposed to be challenging or not, but it's not. And then after those first levels, you just repeat, but slightly harder. So more stuff shows up at the same time, it moves a bit faster. And obviously you'll be missing a few eggs by this point as well. Whoops. Obviously some of those eggs are easier to rescue than others. The ones near the bottom of the screen are quite hard to catch if something grabs them. So you can put them back in a different nest to where they came from. And it's often quite a good idea to do that. So this insane difficulty isn't noticeably harder than the normal difficulty, I have to say. What I found with the... Oh, no, maybe it is. I certainly survived a lot longer than that on normal last time. Although what I did find is once you're down to 1 egg, it's quite easy. Because all you've got to do is just keep an eye on that one thing and then just shoot anything else for some extra points, really. As you'll notice that they come in sort of set lanes. And they don't really move out of their lanes, so... When you're down to 1 egg, or 1 nest, I suppose, there's only really 1 lane that you need to concentrate on protecting, and everything else is just bonus points, basically. Oh, missed. I'm not aware of any way to get bonus eggs either. I'm not actually entirely sure of the origin of this game, because, like I say, I originally played the Atari ST version, and this was part of a range of games that Atari put out at budget prices in sort of cassette case type packaging. And most of those releases were ports of their arcade games with updated graphics. Like they did a version of Asteroids that had like really nice pre-rendered asteroids and spaceships and so on. So it looked a lot better than the original. But this was part of that range, which kind of suggests it was an arcade game. But I don't remember ever seeing this in arcades. I mean, it would have been quite a fun light gun shooter, I guess. Well, I guess stuff like the egg catching mechanic would have been quite challenging to do with an actual light gun. Oh, game over. There we go. So that's the end of my eggs. And that's the end of Cracked for now. So 1988, that one. So that was quite a late 2600 game. Like I say, that was the version of that actually came out and got released was the 7800 version, as far as I'm aware. If we check the write-up here. Yeah, here we are. Developed concurrently for the 2600 and 7800, but only the 7800 version was released. 2600 version only has 3 levels as opposed to 6 on the 7800, and so on. Yeah, here we are. So this 2600 version was actually finally got a release in 2002 at the Classic Gaming Expo. It had a unique label, box, and instructions. So it has had a proper physical release for those who have got a working 2600 and wanted it on cartridge. So that's pretty nice. Okay, next game on my list then. Let's have a look. Right, this is another game I'd never heard of before. This is from 1982, so just a year after I was born. This is called Final Approach, and it kind of jumped out to me just because I don't remember there being that many air traffic control games. The only ones I can think of offhand are it was Kennedy Approach on the Atari systems that we played, and I was terrible at because I didn't really understand it because I was far too young, but it had cool digitized speech anyway. And of course there was Flight Control on mobile phones. That was one of the early successful smartphone games, which then probably got ruined by EA and so on. Blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so this is from 1982 from a company called Apollo, who seemed to do quite a few games around this sort of period. They had their very distinctive packaging, and they had the same sort of hand-painted box art style that Atari tended to do on its 2600 and 8-bit games. But this is a pretty cool game, so we'll take a look at this. So, in this game, what we've got is, in the middle there, that is the runway of an airport. And the flickering yellow line there, those are the approach lights for the runway. And once we start, you will see, after a moment, there we are. So we get some planes start coming in from the side of the screen. You use that black cursor to select one, and then you can take direct control of that plane. So they're constantly in motion, but while you're in control of that plane, you can choose which direction it goes, including just completely turning about face if you want it to. So I'm controlling the blue one at the moment. And essentially what you need to do is you get it on the approach vector like that, move your cursor down to this middle button here, and then you have to line up the plane with the middle of the runway, make sure it's on the glide slope, so it touches down on the end of the runway. Oh, not quite. Okay, so we come back out and try that again. And basically make sure the planes don't hit each other as well. So until you score any points, you don't have to worry about planes going off the side of the screen. But once you've scored some points, if planes fly off the side of the screen, then you will lose points. You will lose lives if planes collide with each other, though. And also, if a plane shows up... Oh, that was a near miss. Also, if a plane shows up and it's flashing, that means it's having an emergency of some sort and you need to deal with it straight away. So it needs to have priority landing. So what we can do is we'll send those off on their way. So this is actually quite a bit like flight control ended up being. And you've got to manage multiple planes on the screen at the same time. Maybe divert the course of some of them so that they're going off in different directions, making sure that they don't crash into each other. There we go, that one's successfully landed. So that's 25 points for me. So now we need to make sure... Oh, we're losing that green one. So we lost 5 points for going off the side of the screen. But now we can take aim for that brown one and bring that one into land. So the controls for this bit are a bit weird in that you've got up and down. There we go. Up and down to get it on the glide slope, and then left and right, even though you're moving it up and down on the screen to center it on the runway. So it takes a little bit of getting used to, but once you do, it makes a bit more sense. There we go. Coming along nicely. So it doesn't really get much more complicated than this, unfortunately, which is a bit of a shame. But obviously that's down to the limitation. Oh, too late. That's mostly down to the limitations of the 2600 not being able to do that many sprites on screen at the same time. But it still gives you plenty to worry about with just 4 planes. And as with most 2600 games, there's a selection of different modes you can play on. Some of which have got more planes, so I think 4's the maximum. Some of which have got fewer planes, and they say those are for young children or polygon journalists. And then there's some that apply crosswinds to the landing sequence as well. That sounds quite irritating, but it would add a bit of challenge to the mix. So I like this game just because it's a little bit different from your usual fare on the 2600. I'm not sure I'd call it sedate or anything, but... Oh dear, there we go. So those 2 planes had a bump into each other. So one of the red lights at the top was lit up. They don't crash or explode or anything now. It's regarded as a near miss, and that's a big no-no for an air traffic controller, apparently. But no one seems to die in this game, which is nice, I guess. Oh, you're gonna make it? Come on, down. There we go. Nice steep landing. The kind of landing that makes Italians applaud. Oh, another near miss. See, a fair bit of the difficulty from this seems to be things you can't actually do a whole lot about. Like if 2 planes spawn next to each other on a collision course for one another, there's not a whole lot you can do about it, unfortunately. But so it's just a case of seeing how long you can last, I guess. So let's bring the green one into land. Yeah, look at him, perfectly lined up already. I like you, Mr. Pilot. Should probably move those 2 out of the way of each other. Yeah, like I said, this is quite a fun game. It would just be nice if it kind of ramped the challenge up a bit more quickly. Like if it was, I don't know, if it was just a bit faster or something, it might be nice. I haven't tried the crosswinds mode, but I can see that being I can see that being more annoying than difficult, to be honest, but and so I like the concept if I'm lukewarm on the execution. But this was 1982, remember, so you know. Anything that wasn't tiny spaceship shoots aliens at that point was worthy of some note. And still is to a certain extent. Well, these days it's more like anything that isn't giant space marine shoots aliens or giant burly soldier shoots aliens and or other giant burly soldiers is worthy of note. So maybe the time is ripe for Final Approach 2017. I'm sure my friend Alex would tell me that there's been a plethora of air traffic control simulations since then that I'm just unaware of. It's quite a niche interest market, I guess, but you know. Someone's probably into it. You know what, forget what I said about this not being sedate. This is actually quite nice and sedate. It's quite a nice relaxing game because, as I say, the speed isn't excessive. So you don't really have to worry too much about what's going on. It's certainly not like later stages in... Oh, here we are. Here's a plane that's got an emergency, so you have to give them priority. In fact, if you don't allow these to be the next plane to land, then you lose one of your lives, I think. So, you have to excuse any coughing today. I've been struggling with the end stages of a cold and got told I have a mild case of tonsillitis the other day. So do please excuse any disgusting noises that come out of my mouth. Like that one. Lovely. Anyway. Aeroplanes. Whee! I'm not actually sure if it carries on processing what's going on this main screen while you're landing the plane. I'll try and keep an eye on what it's doing this time. So if we remember where that blue plane was. So it's less than halfway up the screen when we went to land this red one. So it should be over halfway up by the time this one lands. No, it doesn't appear to update. That's a shame. Would have been interesting to... Oh dear. Anyway, you see what I mean about the plane spawning and it not being entirely fair. But anyway, yeah, it would have been interesting to see the main screen continue to update while you're landing the planes, because that would mean you'd have to sort of make sure that they were on an appropriate course before you brought someone else into land. But I guess poor old 2600 wasn't quite up to that level of... multitasking, I guess that is. So, anyway, that's Final Approach by Apollo. So next up, we're going to take a look at a licensed game. In this case, based on the movie Gremlins. Now, I used to really like the Atari 8-bit version of the Gremlins game, which unfortunately doesn't run very well in an emulator, so we probably won't be playing that today, just because the sound's a bit messed up on it. This is actually a completely different game. So So let's take a look at it. I'm going to bump up the difficulty just a little bit because it's quite easy in the early. Actually, no, let's go from the beginning just so you can see how it ramps up, because this has quite a decent difficulty curve in it. So the aim in this game, there's two main phases. This first one here, you have to catch the mogwais so they don't eat burgers and turn into gremlins. And that repeats for a few phases. I feel like the little dude catching things that are falling from the top of the screen was an actual genre of gaming in the 2600 era, because you had all sorts of stuff like Kaboom and Crackpots and that kind of thing. It all had very similar presentation. This one actually adds a little bit extra to the mix though. So we've got this phase here as well, where those cocoons hatch into gremlins that you then have to shoot. It's pretty straightforward at this point, but in later stages they come multiple at a time, and you have the ability to do a flash of light like that, which stops them in their tracks for a minute, so that's very useful in the later stages. So, as you can see, you then repeat the process, but it's much, much faster. But not unmanageably so just yet. Yet, anyway. Nope. Now, I don't believe you actually get a game over or anything if you sort of drop too many mogwais in that first stage. I think it's only in this second stage here, if you let a gremlin get you, that you actually lose. As you can see, that stage is still pretty straightforward at the moment though. Now it gets ridiculous. How the hell are you supposed to... I said this had quite a good difficulty curve, didn't I? I suppose that's not unreasonable. You see the gremlins are coming more quickly now. They're coming multiple ones at a time. So I guess if you think of that mogwai stage as kind of a bonus stage, if you like. Since you don't seem to be able to actually die in this stage, you just immediately go into the gremlin stage if you lose too many of them. Still not lost a life though. Doing alright. Yeah, you'll notice that they divide when they cross the water as well. Just like real gremlins. Like I say, the Atari 8-bit version of Gremlins was a completely different game to this. It was sort of a top-down... I don't know, kind of hard to describe it. It was a top-down hack and slash, I guess. Oh. That's my first life gone. Yeah, top-down hack and slash kind of game where you had to collect all the mogwais and put them back in the cage. But then there were also gremlins wandering around as well that you had to chop up. And you had to make sure the mogwais didn't eat the food or touch water and so on. It was a cool game. Like I say, the emulator doesn't like it very much, so the sound is painful on the ears, so I won't subject you to that. But if you do get the opportunity to check it out on original hardware, it's worth doing so. Again, this is one of those 2600 games that, I mean, while it's not very complicated, it's got multiple screens for one thing, which is reasonably noteworthy for the time. And multiple screens with a decent amount of graphical detail on each of them as well. You've got coloured sprites, lots of sound effects. You got quite a lot of things going on screen at the same time as well, which is split into 3 now. Yeah, I mean, you look, there's like 6 or 7 gremlins on screen at once, and it's not slowing down or struggling at all with it, which is pretty impressive when you consider the 2600's capabilities or lack thereof. Since I'm probably not going to survive much longer, but let's see how long we can hold out against the horde. Because they're spawning pretty quick now. Yeah, that's a lot of gremlins. Uh-oh. See, movie licensed games for a long time had a reputation for being absolute crap, but this isn't bad. I mean, it's simple, and it doesn't have a whole lot to do with the movie, aside from, you know, having gremlins and mogwais in it, but if I picked this up back in the 80s, I would not be upset. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. That's that. Oh, we got another life. One more life. All about prioritizing your targets. Uh-oh. That's that. Nice bit of music there. That's quite similar to the music that was in the 8-bit version. Anyway, Gremlins. Right, what's next? Another licensed game, of a slightly different type. Yes, this is an official Kool-Aid Man game. Developed by M Network and published by Mattel. This was from 1982 as well. Now, you think we have problems with DLC and product placement and advertising in games now. This is a game that actually expected you to pay for it, despite it being a blatant bit of promotional material. Okay, so this is actually quite a fun game, though, after all the things I just said there. And it starts with that blissfully awful bit of animation there. So the concept of this game is that the thirsties, which are those bomb-like creatures there, those are trying to drain the swimming pool by drinking it, because of course they are. And you, as the bold, intrepid Kool-Aid Man, you have to stop them. And you can only do that by bonking them on the head while they're trying to drink the pool. Because if you bump into them while they're just flying around, then you'll go bouncing around all over the place. And if you pick up ingredients for Kool-Aid while you're... Oops. If you pick up ingredients for Kool-Aid while you're doing what you do, then you'll get all big and it'll be easier. That's first level complete. And that's pretty much all you do. It just gets faster and harder. See, there's a Kool-Aid ingredient. It can't quite reach. This game's kind of fun though, because it has a lot of colour to it. Oh dear. You'll notice that the use of colour is kind of a trick though. As you can see by the colour bars at the side of the screen, each part of the screen is designed to be just a single colour, using sort of display list trickery. And you can see as the sprites move down the screen, you actually see them move through the boundaries of the colour bars. But it's okay, it works. It gives the illusion of there being more colours than it's actually capable of. It's kind of like the gleefully stupid concept of this game. It's like the whole thing with these enemy characters is that they're really thirsty, and so they're drinking pool water. And it's like, you know, if I was really thirsty, the last thing I would think to drink is some disgusting pool water. But you know, I guess if you're thirsty, you're thirsty. Yeah, it's starting to move quite a bit faster now, so it's getting more difficult to dodge them. And you'll see that picking up those Kool-Aid ingredients actually increases the water level in the pool at the bottom as well. So in that way you can kind of recover a bit over time. Well, they don't appear very often though, so you have to make sure you try and grab them when they do. And the pool water doesn't refill between levels either, so... Oh, missed. This is one of those games where your score really didn't need to be that high, because you'll notice that everything you do scores like at least 100 points. So like those the 10s and the 1s in your score are completely irrelevant, so you may... Oh dear, we're dead. So you may as well have just said you've got 239 points there rather than 23,900. Anyway, that's Kool-Aid Man. Oh yeah. Alright, next one's not a brilliant game, but I kind of enjoyed it anyway. So this is called Lost Luggage. This is another game by Apollo. This is from 1981. The concept of this one's pretty simple. You've just got off a plane, and the baggage is flying off the carousel, and you need to catch it. And for some reason you control 2 men. So here we go. Plane lands, baggage starts appearing, you catch it. And if it hits the bottom of the screen, all of the baggage pops open and out pop pairs of pants and bras and bikinis and combs and toothbrushes and things like that. So the game refers to you as your unmentionables. So it's pretty easy to start with, as you can see. The difficulty ramps up pretty quickly, as it does most of the time in these games. So you see already a lot more cases at the same time. I quite like the use of colour in this game. That sort of stripy gradient sky was quite a common technique in a lot of 2600 games, and that kind of carried over onto the Atari 8-bit as well, which is more capable graphically than the 2600 was, but a lot of the same graphical techniques were used. I don't know how much in common they had with the hardware. I imagine not that much, but things like the sort of the colour trick we saw in Kool-Aid Man a minute ago, where different parts of the screen are different colours. That was quite a common technique on the Atari 8-bit. It was called display list interrupts. It was to do with sort of, well, as it sounds like, it was to do with interrupting the signal coming from the computer to the TV, and telling it to do different things at different times. So essentially what it meant was, rather than having the whole screen at one resolution, you'd have... Oh dear, there we go. Rather than having the whole screen running at one resolution as we do in games these days, you might have the top part of the screen running in one resolution to display like your score and your lives and that kind of thing. The main part of the screen in a more sort of graphics focused mode, and maybe another part of the screen to display text. And so, for example, in this game, I mean, if we were using those techniques here, then the sort of top of the screen with the stripy bit, that would be one graphics mode. The bit at the bottom displaying the score, that would be a sort of large text mode, something like graphics mode 2 on the Atari 8-bit, that would be. And then the middle bit would be a graphics mode that you could draw with pixels in. As I say, from what I know of the 2600 hardware, it wasn't really that simple, because in a lot of 2600 programming you were basically addressing bits of the hardware directly rather than using built-in functions using BASIC or various programming languages. Not doing too well here. Oh, come on. Oh, bollocks. This game does seem to be quite generous with the extra lives though, so you can play for reasonable amount of time, if that's what you finally want to do. As I say, it's not a brilliant game. It's just running two blue men into suitcases, but you know, it's got a certain hypnotic quality to it, and it's certainly no worse than some of the shit that's on mobile games these days. Anyway, that's Lost Luggage from Apollo 1982. Right, next up, got a very strange one I'd never heard of before. So this is one from Spectravision. Now, Spectravision is a company that I only really knew from making joysticks and accessories. I wasn't aware that they actually published games as well, but apparently they did in the 2600 era. So this one is from 1983. This is called Mangia, I think that is. It's supposed to be Italian, I think. So I'm just going to read the description over here because it's quite entertaining. It's like, Mangia's gameplay has been described as bizarre. The player gets to control a young boy who must eat plates of pasta placed in front of him by his mother, who will keep feeding him until his stomach explodes on screen. To prevent this, the player can, instead of eating the pasta, throw it to a cat, who occasionally appears at the window, and a dog who walks across the bottom of the screen. So the cat is called Frankie, and the dog is named Sergio, apparently, as well. And so, you see, this is a very simple game, but it's oddly compelling. Alright, here we go. So, as the description said, it's exactly as it sounds. You are a kid sitting at table and your mother is continually bringing you plates of pasta. I'm sure we've all encountered mothers of that type. And the basic aim of this is to survive until the counter at the bottom of the screen gets to 0 without your stomach exploding. That's it, basically. And so the way you do that is by either eating the pasta or throwing it to the dog or the cat. But the twist is, if your mum sees you chucking the pasta to the cat or the dog, then next time she comes, she'll bring you much more pasta. Also, if you miss the dog or the cat, you see the counter goes back up as well, so you have to survive for a bit longer. The other thing that happens is if you let the table get too full, it'll collapse, and that causes you to lose a life as well. So it's a bit of a balancing act. In a weird kind of way, it's sort of a puzzle game, I guess, in that it's all about timing and deciding when is the right time to do things, and organising what's happening on screen. It's just such a weird idea for a game. I really like it, even though this is literally all there is to it. You see his jumper's changed colour now. That means that he's in danger of eating too much. So it's when his stomach goes red, you have to really start worrying. Oh, I'm not doing too well with this. I seem to keep getting seen. Oh. Oh, we're in the red. So if he eats too much more now, he will explode. We've all had dinners like that. Oh no. Kaboom! Mother doesn't look too impressed with that, but then let me just continue. Because you have a few lives. And there is actually kind of a strategy to this, because you'll notice that when she brings you 3 plates at once, it does actually take the counter down by 3 at the bottom. So if you want to get it down a bit more quickly, then if you force her to bring more at the same time, then that can be quite helpful. You just got to be careful not to overload the table while you're doing that. I don't know, I just find something quite charming about that cat sprite at the window. Perhaps because it reminds me of how most cats behave. They say, ooh, food. Oh, damn it. I'm not entirely sure what that sound's supposed to be. It seems to pop up when the cat appears, but also sometimes when the cat isn't there. Oh, shit. Counter's going up rather than down. Eat your pasta. Oh, there we go. Another life down. One mildly annoying thing about this game, as you can see, is the counter goes right back up to 30 when you lose a life. So you're basically starting all over again. I do like how the guy on the wall is basically just Mario. Because Italians. Ah, you goddamn cat. I fear we're going to have a table collapse situation shortly. Or an exploding stomach. That too. Oh, want my life. To endure this for another. I did actually manage to finish one of the levels last night, and then it just carries on and does exactly the same thing. Kind of hard to imagine these days buying a game and it just being this, but, you know, this would be a mini game at best in most games. Oh, shit. Although I guess there are some indie developers out there who would try and make some sort of artistic statement with something like this about, I don't know, eating disorders and gender fluid people of colour or something like that. I don't know. Yeah, doing a bit better this time. One game this does remind me of quite a bit, even though it's not really got a lot to do with it, is Alley Cat. So I actually hadn't put on my list for later on, but I might try and drop in as well, because it is a game I used to like, despite being frightened of the spiders in it. I'm doing much better this time. Probably cursed it now, of course. Oh, bastard. Come here, dog. Oh, it's all gone wrong. You can't get two cat. Oh no. Can't get two cats in one appearance, but other than that, there we go. Anyway, that's Mongia, which I wanted to show you just because it's shared bizarreness. I mean, as the description said, its gameplay was described as bizarre, and I would concur with that. Right. Bear with me, just going to send a couple of brief promotional whoring messages, and then I will be right back. Just quickly uploading a post on my website, just in case the stream isn't working for anyone. Alright, continuing. So next game I want to look at is Pressure Cooker. This is a fun little game. So early Activision one. Now, we all mock Activision these days for being Call of Duty loot box extravaganza, but they did some really cool games back in the 8-bit era. And this was one of them. So, the way this works is you make burgers. So you have to follow the orders at the bottom of the screen to construct your burger and then drop it in the appropriately coloured bin at the bottom. So here we see that there's a red burger, or a red customer, and a green customer. They want a burger with some lettuce on. So if we drop that down the red bin, like that, we get some points. Oops. And no one wants cheese, so we hold down the fire button just to bounce that back into there. Someone wants a plain burger, so we just put that right on the top. And then chuck that down the green. And get some points. Someone wants some tomato, so we pop that on there. Grab a burger top. And chuck that down the green. One for some onion. Burger top. And grab it. And down either the green or the red. Now at 49 at the top, those are your performance points. So every time you mess something up, like you drop an ingredient or you put a burger down the wrong thing, you'll lose a certain number of those. And at the end of a level, you will get some bonus points according to how many of those you got left. And I think you can get some back at certain score boundaries as well. So, alright, so let's pop that one down the red. No one wants cheese, so that can go back in there. A red person wants some tomato. Alright, so you see we've only got blue orders now. So that can go down there. No one wants tomato, so that goes back in there. Someone wants some cheese. There we go, bit of cheese. One for the blue bin. And an onion. Another one for the blue bin. And one more onion. And that should be it for this first shift. There we go, perfect. Alright, then we repeat the whole process with some slightly more complicated burgers this time. So, this one wants an onion. And either some cheese or some lettuce. Or this onion can go on the next one because there's two of them want an onion. You notice by holding an ingredient, more stuff doesn't come out, so. Yeah, and go away, tomato, we don't want you. No one likes tomato. So onion and lettuce, that's one. That wants to go down the blue. Still no tomato. Onion and cheese was one. That goes down the blue as well. Finally got a tomato, so we got tomato and onion. This one goes down the green. Just lettuce. So all the thrills and spills are working for minimum wage. Nope, not just yet. Oh, give me an onion. There we go. I'm sure you can see how this one gets quite frantic quite quickly. Because you lose a lot of those performance points if you let a burger fall off the bottom of that conveyor belt there. Still no one wants tomatoes. Plain burger, I can respect that. Alright, so lettuce and onion. Cheese and onion or cheese and lettuce. One thing you will notice about these early Activision games is that they always had a certain touch of arrogance about them with their sort of prominent logo at the bottom of the screen. That was a fixture in all their games throughout the entire 2600 and Atari 8-bit era. They always wanted you to make sure that you knew exactly who your game was by. I guess that's cool. It did give their games a certain sense of their own identity. Which is something you could argue they lack a bit these days. Alright, what's next? Cheese and onion. Classic combo. Not for me, but, you know, I know plenty of people who like it. Onion and tomato. Oh dear, whoops. Just cheese, that'll do. You see, you lose one of those performance points if you don't catch the food properly. No more cheese. Tomato and an onion. One for the green. I like this game because it seems actually quite sensibly designed in that it's not completely randomized. So like you see, when you've completed the burger on the conveyor belt at the side, you're more likely to get a burger bun topping coming out. So it has been designed with a bit of thought rather than just randomly chucking stuff at you. And I joke about Activision being arrogant, but the fact is, in this era of gaming in particular, they did make some of the best games. Certainly some of the most technically impressive games. I mean, like, compare the graphics on this to what we were just looking at with the luggage handling game, which I've forgotten the name of already. Lost Luggage. And yeah, you can't really compare them, can you? Because I mean, look at the use of colour in this, and there's those lovely gradient fills and multicoloured sprites, and all sorts of goodness. Cheese, lettuce. You can actually put one ingredient on a burger more than once if you want to. You don't get any extra points for doing that, but it is a way of getting rid of stuff that you might not want. So onion. Oh, just onion. That'll do. One for the green. A bit of tomato and some lettuce and some onion. Oh, missed. Have some cheese then. Quick. Down the red. Couple of people joined us, welcome. This is my extra live stream. We are playing Atari 2600 games. This is Pressure Cooker. And I'm about to lose a burger. Oh no! There we are, 10,000 points. Get some extra points back. 10,000 points was always a milestone in this era of gaming, so you normally got an extra life or something at that point, or a bonus, or something of that description. Right, tomato and onion. Tomato, onion and cheese. So that one's going down the green. And lettuce and onion. One for the red. Tomato, bit of lettuce. Have some more tomato. Nope. Nope. Yep, I'll take that one. I'll try not to lose that one in the meantime. There we go. Come on, quick. Bit of lettuce, bit of cheese, and we need a tomato with that as well. Oh, finally. Starting to get a bit more cagey about giving me the give me the things I actually want and need for the burgers, and we're going to lose one. Cock. Yeah, it is getting noticeably harder. Nothing I can't handle there. I worked in a pub kitchen, I know how this works. Seems to have suddenly got much easier again. I think I might have just increased the speed a bit and put the complexity back down to make up for that. Everyone wants the onion. Oh, all bonus points. Right, back on the slightly more complex burgers now. Oops. Oh dear, losing my concentration. Right. One for the blue pal. One for the green pile. No, no one wants you. I said no one wants you. Or you. No one wants the lettuce. Stop giving me lettuce. Uh-oh. Quick! Oof. That was tight. Oh shit. Oh dear. Less good. I'm fine for now.
Want me to put it back in the fridge? Or?
Yeah, please. Oh, we're gonna lose one. Oh no. That's that. So that is Pressure Cooker. One of numerous games throughout that era of gaming that had an odd fascination with burgers. Another one from 1983. It was obviously quite a prolific year for 2600 games. Also the year of the notorious crash, which is the two things are probably related. Anyway, Pressure Cooker. Alright, 20 more minutes of 2600 stuff before we move on to the Atari 8-bit. So, next up we're going to look at a game that actually sort of only really came out, if you like, quite recently. So it didn't actually get a release when it was originally created because of the video game crash. It's called Save Mary. Now, originally developed around sort of the 1983 mark, but didn't see release until much later on sort of various Atari 2600 compilations, like the Atari Flashback Classics on the PS4 and the Atari Vault on PC. And this is a kind of weird, I don't know, kind of hard to describe really, but you'll see. So basically Mary is stuck at the bottom of this chasm because Mary's an idiot, and it's your job to save her using your crane. Fortunately, Mary's quite good at jumping. But she's not that good at avoiding blocks. So you need to try and make sure that you don't drop shit on her head. Because, as we previously mentioned, Mary is an idiot. The aim of this game, basically, is to build up the stack at the bottom of the screen to such a point that you can reach Mary with your crane and pick her up. You also get these various power-ups at the side of the screen that will have various effects. That one I've just picked up, for example, stops Mary from moving for a little while, which is quite helpful. Because she has a bit of a habit of getting in the way. Can't quite reach her yet. So probably one more block will do it for this. Oh no! As you see, you can also knock Mary off with your blocks. Let's try that again. So this first level you just have these regularly shaped blocks. From what I understand, although I can't remember if I ever actually got that far, the later levels you have some slightly more awkwardly shaped pieces to deal with. Let's see if we can actually get that far without twatting her on the head with a lump of concrete like we did last time. Can we reach it yet? Yes, we can. Alright, one level down. And then a nice bonus according to how many blocks we used. Right. Yes, I have got this far before. And these are a pain in the ass. Because you have to stack them a lot more accurately than the previous ones. It's quite difficult to do that accurately. He might have made a mess of this. Yeah, I've definitely made a mess of this. Yeah, alright, Mary. If you hadn't got stuck down this stupid canyon in the first place, this wouldn't be an issue. Stand still. Oh, you dick. As I believe I mentioned at the beginning, Mary is an idiot. Right, let's try building a firmer foundation from the beginning this time. Oops. Now this is going a bit better. It's just quite difficult to accurately position these. Unhelpful. Alright, not doing too badly this time. I dread to think what the blocks are on the next stage if they're this awkward on this level. Move. Oh, that's a useful one. If you use that plug, it stops the water rising for a little while. Which is very handy, as I'm sure you can imagine. Don't hit Mary on the head. Can we reach her yet? Get up. No, still not quite. No. Oof. See, that's not going to work, is it? Need one of the upside down ones. Careful. Gotcha. Alright. This is officially the first I've ever got in this game now. Oh my god. Okay. This doesn't look awkward at all. No! Don't! Oh, thank you. Right. What? That should have fallen neatly into that gap, surely. No, apparently not. Okay. Maybe we put it here then. Oh dear. There we go. Right. Use the old plug to hold back the water for a bit. These blocks aren't quite as tricky as they look, because you just stack them up like this and you're sorted, really. That's not going to work. Oh, it will. Why wouldn't they work at the bottom then? I don't know. This is a silly game. And we got her. We got her. Alright, bring it on. Your teeny tiny blocks. Oh, teeny tiny blocks and irritatingly shaped blocks. Well, this should be fun. Oh dear, this is going to be challenging. And now you can't reach that because you're an idiot. Oh, dicks. No, why didn't I go there? I was entirely sure how the physics are calculated in this. That's not going to work, is it? Let's get some sort of really firm foundation down. And the gaps proving to be a... Oh dear. Ooh, lucky. Filling in the gaps proving to be a profitable strategy, I was going to say. Not if you drop it on their head, though. God damn it, Mary. No. Well, that's that. That's saved Mary. So, the story behind that one, I believe, If we just check old faithful Wikipedia. Or Atari prototypes, anyway. There we are. Save Mary is one of those Atari 2600 revival titles that should have been released but was ultimately lost when Atari closed its 2600 operations in 1980. Okay, so I was wrong. This wasn't anything to do with the video game crash at all. It may have been in development longer than any other Atari 2600 game, over 2 years. A long time back in those days. One reason for this was Atari management constantly making changes to an already complex game. Another reason for the long development cycle is that programmer Todd Fry of Pac-Man fame may only have been working part-time for Atari at the time, and was also working on another unreleased 2600 game, Shooting Arcade. So yeah, supposedly this is a game that it didn't get released, but it was very well received by sort of higher ups at Atari, like Nolan Bushnell and such like. So it's a bit of a shame that it never actually got released, because it's a good game, as you can see. It's a little bit more complex than sort of your average fare on the Atari 2600. Alright, I'm going to take just a brief break just to send a few promotional messages and badger a few people into coming to watch. And I will be right back with some Atari 8-bit games very shortly. Alright, 10 o'clock, time to switch generations to the Atari 8-bit. Now, the Atari 8-bit is the earliest generation of actual computers that I have real memories of. The 2600 was a little bit before my time, although there was a bit of overlap, obviously, as we've seen. Like the last game we played on the 2600, Save Mary, is actually from 1990, which I would have been there for, but we never actually had our own 2600. We did, however, have lots of Atari 8-bit computers, which I've recently come into possession of, thanks to my parents having a root around in the loft. And I'm also in the process of starting up a new site about those. So if you check out atarixl.wordpress.com, you'll see the beginnings of that. And that will get some updates very soon if you'd like to find out a bit more about that sort of thing. For now, though, we're going to play some games. We're going to emulate them because actually hooking up the Atari 8-bit to the streaming setup is a bit of a faff. So, yeah, we're going to make use of some emulated versions here. So I've got a selection of games that I want to show, most of which are games that I grew up with. In fact, I think pretty much all of these are games I grew up with. So, all right. Let's just jump right in. So for the next 2 hours, we're going to be looking at Atari 8-bit games. In no particular order. The first one we're going to start with is this one here. That doesn't have any cover art in Launchbox, but let's have a look anyway. So, OBS, which I'm using to stream with, doesn't really like running this emulator in full screen for some reason, so I'll be playing it in a window. I'm sure you understand. I will at least put it in the middle of the screen for you. There we go. So Juice is one of numerous games that came out around sort of the early to mid 80s that were based rather heavily on Qbert. Now, Qbert, of course, was the arcade game where you jump around on the big pyramid and change its colours. There were lots of games that kind of built on this idea a bit, that changed things around slightly, and Juice was one of those. And you'll see it kind of makes itself distinct from its source material. So I've never actually seen the original packaging or the manual for this, because as anyone who grew up in the Atari 8-bit era knew, that piracy was absolutely rife. So chances are, if you had a version of a game, it was probably a ripped-off copy from somewhere. And certainly I know that most of the games we had on the 8-bit were from the rather euphemistically named Computer Club, which appeared to mostly be a means for swapping pirated games. And so the only version of Juice I've ever seen is a pirate version. Which means I have no real idea of the concept, but I think it's something to do with electricity. So basically, as you can see, the aim of the game is to jump around on every square, fill it with cable, and move on to the next level, while trying not to get eaten by various nasties like that. Yeah, it's a very simple game, obviously, but I always liked it. There was something about the sound effects I always really liked in this game. Kind of hard to find what it was that I liked about the sound effects in this game. It's when I was growing up, I didn't quite make the electricity juice connection, so I always thought the sound effects sounded a bit juicy, for want of a better word. Especially that noise he makes when he jumps. I always remember that springy thing freaking me out a bit as well. There's also a really annoying lightning bolt that shows up every so often as well. I can't remember if it's this level that it first appears on. Yeah, there it is. Oh no! And you see what it does? It basically undoes your work. Not at the minute, no. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm fine for that. Mm-hmm. So for this second stage, you see we've got to actually jump on everything twice. Again, this is kind of a reflection of This is kind of a reflection of how Qbert worked as well. In the later levels in that, you'd have to jump on all the cubes twice to change them from one colour to another, and then to another after that. And this is just a variation on that mechanic. In the case of this one, it's actually kind of in your interest to leave them on the first stage for as long as possible, because that lightning bolt keeps showing up and turning them back to the first stage, so if you can minimise the damage that does, that's a good idea. Oh dear, and we're dead. Alright, so that's Juice. That's a game I always enjoyed playing growing up. I'm not sure if it's particularly well known or well regarded or anything like that, but it's one I always used to enjoy. So, all right, let's move on. Okay, so next game we're going to look at is another old Activision one. This is River Raid. Now, the Atari 2600 version of this is much more well known than this one, but I'm not entirely sure why, because the Atari 8-bit version is way better. So River Raid, what we do is you fly up a river and you shoot things. And the reason the 8-bit version is better is because, I mean, the graphics are better. There's also more variety to it as well, so there's more different enemies. Oops. That's a good start, isn't it? Let's try again. Right, start again. As I was saying, in River Raid you fly up a river, you shoot things, you collect fuel, and the basic aim is to get as far as you possibly can, destroying bridges along the way. So your progress, as you can see at the bottom of the screen, is measured by which bridge you're on. Okay, so you destroy a bridge, and that's effectively the next level. So this is quite a well-known one for a number of reasons. So the first thing is that it was developed by a lady, Carol Shaw. One of the earliest known sort of female developers in video gaming. So I know that's sort of always made out to be a big deal these days, but it's there have been women working in games since pretty much the beginning, as you can see. But the cool thing about this is that, I mean, it's a massive game. It goes on for I have no idea how long it goes on for, but it's certainly a lot of levels. And particularly in the original Atari 2600 version, this was a really impressive achievement, because you couldn't fit much on one of those cartridges, and you couldn't fit much in the Atari 2600 memory either. So what Carol Shaw did with this game is she used a very early form of procedural generation. So basically this game is generating these levels on the fly, but rather than it being randomly generated, what she did was she set it to use the same sort of random seed. So that what it would do is it would actually generate exactly the same levels every time. And so in that way there was no need for it to store all the level data in sort of explicit form, because she set up the programming in such a clever way that the game could basically build itself as you went through. Oops. And that was a really smart and efficient way of doing this. And it certainly doesn't show, like, in the way that sort of modern procedurally generated stuff is obviously procedurally generated, in that it doesn't have that sort of handcrafted feel to it. It's like all of River Raid feels like everything has been placed very deliberately. So you see there's things like that. That tank there is placed precisely... Oh, bollocks. That tank there is placed precisely so it shoots that fuel dump. And you have things like it changes the colour scheme every few bridges. You've got these enemies at awkward positions. And so it's a really impressive achievement all round, really, just for all sorts of reasons. Plus it's also just a really good game as well. And one of the reasons it's so fondly regarded is it's a little bit different from your average... bollocks! A little bit different from your average vertically scrolling shooter in that you can change your speed. So you got to worry about things like your fuel gauge and so on. But the fact you can speed up and slow down as you go through allows you to sort of take care while you're navigating particularly perilous bits of the course. But if there's bits you know well, you can also show off a bit by sort of powering through at high speed, or just trying to make it past things like those moving ships before they get to you, and so on. Yeah, this has always been one of my favourite games on the Atari 8-bit in particular. Like I say, it kind of bums me out a bit that the only version you ever see these days is the Atari 2600 version, which is vastly inferior to this one. It's because it doesn't have things like those planes flying across the screen, it doesn't have the hot air balloons, it doesn't have things shooting at you. The graphics are much simpler. It's just not as good. I mean, it's still a cracking game, don't get me wrong, but it's just a shame that we never see the superior version. It's one example of many of sort of that era of gaming. The Atari 8-bit doesn't get a lot of mass acknowledgement, if you like. And I didn't really at the time either, because there are other systems who were much more popular than it, like the ZX Spectrum and the Commodore 64 and such like. They're all much more popular than the Atari, even though in many cases the Atari was more capable than them. But at the same time, the Atari also used to lose out when it came to multi-platform stuff, so if there was something that was on the Atari and also on the Commodore 64, the Commodore 64 version would inevitably be the better one, even though the Atari was capable of much more. Oh dear. Doing badly here. But like I say, because these systems were so popular at the time, a lot more so than the Atari 8-bit computers, it meant that sort of from a modern historical perspective, it tends to get forgotten about quite a bit. Which is a shame, because there were some really great games on it that just don't seem to get acknowledged anymore. Anyway, that is River Raid. I could quite happily spend the next 2 hours playing that, but I will spare you from that. And move on to another one of my favourites. So this is a really early game from Lucasfilm. Now Lucasfilm made quite a few games for the Atari 8-bit. And a lot of them use the same techniques that we used in this game, which is called Rescue on Fractalus. Now, Rescue on Fractalus is basically, I guess you could describe it as a sort of 3D take on Defender. But the main sort of cool thing about it is that it makes use of the sort of fractally generated terrain. It was originally intended to be a demonstration of anti-aliasing of all things on an Atari 8-bit computer, but as you'll see, that didn't really work out. If you look at things like the jagged lines on the cockpit and so on, and that actually became a bit of an in-joke. So the original prototype version of this game is called Behind Jaggy Lines, and the enemies in the game are called Jaggies, just because the whole anti-aliasing thing didn't really work, so you ended up with all these jagged edges and so on. But anyway, let's jump right in, because despite the lack of the technique it was originally supposed to be showing off, it's still a pretty damn impressive game for the time. So this was 1985 this came out. So the aim in this game is you're flying down to the planet Fractalus and you're looking for pilots, which are represented on, you see on the long range scanner, there's the flashing dot, and there's also I've completely forgotten the key commands for this. Oh dear. Right, I'll tell you what, I'm just going to quickly look up the key commands so I remember what they actually are. And then I'll give you a more accurate demonstration of how this game works. So if you're at all interested in Atari games, this site, Atari Mania, is a really good resource. It's got things like manual scans, it's got all sorts of things. So increase thrust, decrease thrust, land. Right, arrow keys to do that. Airlock boosters. Right, sorted. Let's try that again, shall we? Right, this time without setting fire to any pilots. I love the sound effects in this game. So that sort of whistling noise in the background of the engine is such a brilliant sound. Right, as I was saying before. Oh, getting shot at already. So the way this game works is you look for pilots on the long range scanner down below. Try not to get shot in the process. There's one. When you're close to one, when it's flashing like that, it means that they are close enough to hop into your ship. I can't actually see that, but I'm going to turn my systems off anyway, and you should be able to hear them running up to your ship. Bang on your airlock. Open the door. Let him in. Turn any systems on. Off you go. Easy peasy. And so on each level you've got a certain number of pilots you need to try and rescue, which is displayed by the O3P down in the bottom corner. You'll see each time you rescue a pilot you get a bit of your energy back as well, so you use energy just by flying around, but also by shooting your weapons and by bumping into things as well. So you can't just crash, but you can do yourself a bit of damage by bumping into too many things. And of course there's these enemies that show up and cause you a bit of hassle as well. If you choose to start from level 1, there's no enemies to begin with, but the default level it starts you on is actually level 4, which gives you a reasonable challenge to begin with. It gives you sort of some of the most common enemies to deal with, which are those flying saucers that try and crash into you, and sort of the mountaintop gun installments as well. Right, not having much luck finding any pilots at the minute, so... Oh! Oh, that's a ship from one of the ones we already rescued. So you can tell that because there's no little pip on the long range scanner on the right. So let's accelerate a little bit. Oh, there's an enemy. And there's a pilot. So landscapes in this, they're not polygonal, they're all generated by fractals, hence the name, Rescue and Fractless. And this was a technique that LucasArts used a whole lot in several of their games. So I believe this one was the first one. But then they also went on and produced a first-person adventure type thing called the Eidolon, which involved travelling through time, exploring caves, and fighting dragons and all sorts of things. That was a really weird game. They also did a game called Coronis Rift, in which you were driving a tank and exploring... Ooh, too high. So you were driving a tank around, you were exploring these various places called rifts and looking for treasure, basically. And your job in that game was to sort of shoot down flying saucers and find treasure and analyze it and all sorts. And that game, as far as I am aware, was never sort of quite finished properly, so it didn't quite work as it was intended to, but it was an interesting game nonetheless. But this one here, or rather its prototype version, which we had as a kid, it was one of my favourites. So when you got all the pilots, or just before normally, your mothership will show up, so you fire your boosters, go back in its base, dock, and that's the level done. Get yourself some bonus points, and be on your way. And that's basically how this game works. Like River Raid, I could happily play this for hours, but we'll see how far we can get. The difficulty does start to ramp up quite quickly, especially once the enemies start getting a bit more common. Oh, I'm getting shot at already. One thing I quite liked about this is that you didn't have to be too accurate with your shots. Like it was pretty forgiving with that sort of thing. So it would have been easy for it to require sort of pinpoint accuracy on this kind of thing. But I'm glad they allowed a sort of certain degree of splash damage, if you like. This game was quite notorious for another reason, in that it was one of the first games to have a jump scare in it. So we haven't actually been able to land in a position where we can see the pilots approaching, but in fact that's quite a bad thing in some of the later levels, because not all of the pilots are friendly, shall we say. You see one? He's still too low, he's below us. Yeah, not all the pilots are friendly. Sometimes there are sort of alien infiltrators. And you can tell if one's coming because their helmet will be green. And so you can be ready for that, as long as you can see the pilot. But as you can see, it's often quite difficult to land in the position where you can see the pilot approaching. Sometimes you just have to sort of take it on blind faith. And these alien infiltrators, what they do is, instead of knocking on the door like the pilots do, is they will jump up and start hammering on your windshield and start basically trying to break your ship apart. And it's absolutely terrifying when it happens when you don't expect it. There's another one. Right, let's see if we can land and actually see this one approaching. No, I've done it again, haven't I? Oh, who is shooting at me? You are. You must die now. Bugger off. So I'm not having much luck being able to see these pilots. How much disappeared? Yeah, there's one. Right. Just destroy that bad boy. And see if we can land in visual range of this one. There we go. Right, so it's in your interest to try and land so you can see that flashing beacon where the pilot's coming from. Because, as you can see, you can then see the pilot running up to you. If they got a white helmet, you're all good. If they got a green helmet, then they are an alien. And if that happens, you want to turn your engines back on quickly and burn them up. There's also ace pilots as well. They got, I think, purple helmets, if I remember rightly. And they're worth a lot of extra points. But there's no real way of telling which ones those are until you actually land and pick them up. So it's pretty much sort of a random chance if you'll find one of them. Doing better with the whole visual range thing now. Alright, another level down. I used to really like this sort of interstitial thing here. it did make me wonder about the physics of the mothership we were supposedly in. Although that was kind of addressed by the intro sequence. Where rather than just an elevator going up, it's sort of a big loop going round it with all these launch bays on it. Otherwise it would have to be an incredibly tall mothership. Right. Ooh, one right ahead of us. Ooh, two right ahead of us, in fact. The thing that always freaks me out a little about this game is I can never remember what level that the aliens actually start appearing on, so I'm always a little paranoid about whether or not they're actually going to show up or not, but we're all good for now. Loads clustered right together at the start of this one. I am all for that. If I remember rightly, there was one back here as well. Somewhere. Maybe? As you can see, the mothership actually shows up before you have rescued all the pilots. So you can actually finish a level early if you want to, but you don't get as many points if you do that. I don't think you get the full bonus or something like that. I know we just rescue them all anyway, because I feel bad if I don't do it. I think one of the reasons I enjoyed this game as a kid is that I always saw my dad enjoying sort of flight simulators and so on. When I was a kid, those were a bit too complicated for me. There were a few too many buttons and things like that. Although that said, I did get reasonably good at sort of the basics of Flight Simulator 2 at one point. But what this game gave me is a sort of accessible take on Flight Simulator. So you had a few key commands to remember, but you had a few key commands to remember, but not so many that it was completely inaccessible. And obviously this isn't in any way realistic either. The flight model isn't at all realistic. And the graphics were pretty impressive for the time. But obviously there's no sort of real world influence in this or anything. This is pure sci-fi. I always used to just think that the cockpit of this ship was really cool. So one of the things I used to enjoy doing when I was a kid was I used to just draw things that I enjoyed. And one of the things I used to love drawing was cockpits of spaceships and aeroplanes and that kind of thing. I used to be fascinated by this. partly from, like I say, because of my dad playing flight simulators and me watching them and later on playing them a bit, but I also just used to really enjoy imagining myself being in these sort of fantastic vehicles. And this game was one of the earliest ones I can remember that actually gave you a full-on cockpit view with working instruments and so on. And that was something I always looked for in my games in the early days, is sort of the opportunity to do things that I couldn't do in the real world, or I was too young to do. So I used to be fascinated by things like driving games as well, especially ones that gave you a cockpit view. So things like Test Drive on the Atari ST I used to love, just because it put you right in the cockpit of a car. It's like it was a cool car, and that it's like it's Ferrari F40 and Porsche 9 something in that one. I can't remember exactly what the models were, but yeah, I would have been happy if Test Drive was just a game about driving a metro around, to be honest, because it wasn't sort of the cool car I was interested in. It was just the fact that it was a game that gave me the opportunity to drive a car. I remember as a kid being sort of fascinated and a bit scared by the prospect of one day I would be driving a car like my parents and my brother did, but obviously now it's no big deal. But when I was a kid, any opportunity to fantasize about that sort of thing and have that aided by... Sorry, I'm being quiet just in case there's aliens popping up. But yeah, any opportunity I could have to sort of aid that fantasy, if you like, through computer games, I would take that, because it was just a nice way of sort of realizing dreams and ambitions, if you want to sound all grand about it. We're getting into I can't see pilots approaching territory again. Jesus Christ, there we go. Yeah. So that's what happens when an alien appears. And if I remember rightly, if you accidentally open your airlock instead of turning your systems back on to burn them up, then yeah, you can find yourself in a whole world of if you do that. You can hopefully see now why it's important to see if the person approaching your spaceship is who you think they are. This game, I believe, did come out on some other systems. I'm not sure which offhand, but this Atari version is always the one that stuck with me. Alright, we'll do one more level of this and then we'll move on to something else, because I don't want to get too hung up on one game for a long time. Because although this is a great game, it is pretty much the same thing over and over again. So we'll do one more of this and then we'll move on. So I do like how interactive the cockpit is in this. Like, you'll notice that there's all sorts of lights lighting up and things. So you got the thing in the middle that's showing you how close the walls are on either side of you. You got the scanner in the middle. You got the altimeter on the left, the energy bar on the right, the long range scanner, the artificial horizon. Everything works. I believe the only thing that doesn't have any real function is those flashing lights underneath the scanner in the middle. That's fine, because they just look cool. It's very much the Star Trek approach to interface design. This is one of those games in which it always felt a bit weird to have a score. In fact, in the 8-bit era, we were still in the age where score was relevant for a lot of games, but in stuff like this, it was... Oh dear. And stuff like this, it was kind of more about the experience and sort of completing stages of it rather than actually scoring points, but you still had a score, so I guess there are still sort of arcade type elements to this, in that you can fail, you can mess up, you can do better, and I guess the score sort of gives you a numerical idea of how long you survived for, how well you did, that kind of thing. It's the ace. So if we could have seen him approaching, he would have had a purple helmet. No filthy comments at the back there, please. Alright, so that is Rescue on Fractalus, which is one of my favourite Atari 8-bit games. As I say, I think it came out on some other systems as well, but that is the version that I played growing up. or rather the prototype version, which we inexplicably had a copy of from the aforementioned euphemistically named computer club, Pirate Exchange Central. Right, as I say, as tempting as it is to continue playing that, let's move on. Thank you very much for the donation, Tom, if you're watching. Right, moving on. Another favourite. If I can find it. Hope I've actually got it after all this. There it is. Right. Oh, it doesn't work. That's disappointing. Okay, never mind. That was going to be Mule, which is one of the best strategy games ever made, and the only strategy game I've ever actually been any good at, but it doesn't work. That's disappointing. Never mind. Plenty of other games we could play. In other words, if you ever have the opportunity to play Mule, then please do, because it's amazing. Right. This game is called Miner 2049er. I think that's how you pronounce it anyway. This is an extremely well-regarded platform game from the Atari 8-bit era. I think it came out on the 8-bit first, but it was then ported to pretty much everything. This was an interesting one because it was very expensive to get over in this country. It was very expensive in its sort of native territory of the States as well, because it came out on a large ROM cartridge. So it had a lot more memory on it than your average ROM cartridge. So it was very expensive. It was $49.95 in 1982, which is a lot of money for back then. But in order to get it over here, you had to import it, which made it even more expensive to do so. Unless, of course, you're a filthy pirate like everyone was in those days and you got it for free. So the aim in this game, then, is you have to basically paint, or mine, I guess, all of the platforms just by walking over the top of them. And that's it, pretty much. So this is a fairly standard format for platform games at the time. You have this sort of single screen layout, you have enemies that are moving back and forth in very predictable patterns, some way of defeating those enemies. In this case, anytime you pick up an item, you get sort of Pac-Man style invincibility for a little while. And you have a time limit as well, of course. And this was, I mean, it's obviously very simple by today's standards, but it was very well regarded back in the day because it's got good controls. It's got some interesting level design. I mean, it doesn't have that many levels by modern standards. It's got 10 different screens. That was a lot back in the day, especially when you consider it was sort of a 16K ROM cartridge. None of your megabits. 10 screens was quite a lot, and then those 10 screens would then repeat after that at a higher difficulty, sort of with more monsters or faster monsters or that kind of thing. So and again, obviously the graphics are pretty primitive as well, but they've got a bit of personality to them, and the whole game's got character, basically. And then you had sort of interesting mechanics like these slides on this level, and you see the next one's got some teleporters in it as well. So it wasn't just a straight clone of like Donkey Kong or something, which was sort of very tempting for a lot of developers to do at the time. It's just to sort of clone the established format. It actually transpired that sort of this became so popular that its basic format became one of the ones that got cloned all the time. So it must have been doing something right. There are games like sort of Mr. Robot and His Robot Factory was one I remember quite well that used this format. So rather than sort of painting platforms in that one, you were you're sort of picking up dots from them. So a bit like crossing it with Pac-Man, I guess. There we are, we got the teleporters in this one. So you press a key on the keyboard to move between the different platforms. And you have to be careful because if you, as in most games of this era, if you fall too far, you will die. It's not quite sort of Spelunker hard, but you do have to know what you're capable of. So you see, that fall would have killed you in Spelunker, but in this case, no, you can pretty much survive that. But this level's pretty tricky because you've got to sort of really understand that jumping mechanic and how far you can fall, how far you can jump, how to reach those enemies without dying, and so on. And I think I may have messed this up, but we'll see. Oh no, there we go. So if we get rid of that beastie over there. You can hopefully get an idea of why this is so well regarded. It's just a very tightly tuned platformer. So it's designed in such a way that you can sort of work out whether you're able to make a jump, whether it's safe to do so. Everything is calculated very, very carefully. Oh dear, that was not calculated effectively. One slightly annoying thing there is if you die, you have to start the whole level over again, which is a bit of a shame, but, you know, understandable, because it would have probably been a bit easy otherwise. I'll deal with all the enemies first and then worry about the platforms. This is one game that I can vaguely remember inexplicably frightening me when I was a kid for some reason. I think it was because I wasn't very good at it and I didn't like the animation when you got killed by the monsters, which seems kind of ridiculous today when I'm sure you'll see it at some point. But yeah, it used to legitimately freak me out for some reason, so I tended not to... Oh dear. I tended not to play this game all that much because... yeah, I was scared of it. Now I'm an adult, of course, I can handle it, no problem. I think just the appearance of those enemies used to freak me out a bit as well. Post. Thank you. Well, I don't know. I don't know if that count includes people who are just watching but not logged in.
Yeah, I think it does.
Does it? Okay. Shit. Alright, so that is Miner 2049 now. It is a fun platform game from back in the day. It got a sequel as well called Bounty Bob Strikes Back. And I believe he appeared in one other game as well that I forget the name of. But yeah, they tried to make that into a bit of a franchise. With a certain degree of success. Right. What should we do next? Okay, I've got a couple of other platformers, but we will save that for a little bit later. Let's try something else for now. Okay, so this is a game called Zybex. Now, as I recall, this was originally released as a budget game. This was a budget game by a company called Zeppelin, who are still around today. I forget exactly who they are now. Something like Eutechnics or something like that. But so they're still around today, definitely. But yeah, they originally started as a budget-centric developer and publisher of games for the Atari 8-bit. So they released stuff on cassette for the Atari 8-bit for like $2.99 or something like this. And this was one of their best games. It was well known for having sort of this excellent music at the beginning. Adam Gilmour, he was well known for doing good music on the Atari 8-bit. But it was also a really good game as well. It was a sort of, I guess, Gradius-inspired shooter. This is one of those games that unfortunately the Atari 8-bit version lost out a bit to the... Oops. Oh dear, I suck. As I was saying. I'm just going to die and start again. Because this is atrocious performance. Yeah, I don't really have to put my name in for that, but... Anyway. So yeah, as I was saying, this is a game that kind of lost out to its ports on other platforms like the... Oh, Jesus Christ. On other platforms like the Commodore 64. The Commodore 64 version had much more colour going on. For one thing. I mean, this was still a reasonably good looking game for the Atari 8-bit. It's just, it had the same problem a lot of Atari 8-bit games had, which is that they kind of stuck it all in one colour palette. They at least bothered to vary that palette from level to level. But when you compare it to the Commodore 64 version, it's hard not to feel like we lost out a little bit. Also, it is bastard hard. I don't remember it being quite this difficult, but you know, it's one of those shoot 'em ups where the difficulty isn't necessarily from the bullet patterns, it's that it moves quite quickly and you really need to remember the enemy attack patterns and such like, otherwise you're going to get in a real mess. Now the cool thing about this game was that you had these different weapons that you could upgrade. Now I will try and demonstrate that without quite so much incompetence this time. Yeah, there we go. Alright, so you have these different weapons. So you actually fire automatically in this game, rather than having to hammer the fire button. And pressing the fire button just changes between the different weapons you've got. So the minute I'm using like this railgun type thing, and I can switch back to the standard bullet pattern here if you like. And collecting more of the same weapon makes it more powerful. So in the case of the bullet weapon, it fires more bullets at once. In the case of the railgun weapon, the rail itself gets longer, so it can take out more enemies at the same time. But if you die, you lose a level from the weapon that you're currently using. And for everything except that initial gun, if you lose the last level of it, then you lose it completely. Which obviously sucks, so don't do that. Like I just... The other big deal about this game back when it came out is it had simultaneous two-player mode, which is pretty cool. So quite a few games on the Atari 8-bit had a simultaneous two-player mode, but this was cool because a lot of shoot-em-ups were either single-player or had sort of take it in turns two-player modes, which was still fun, but not quite as fun as both being able to be on the screen at the same time. Right, one more try. See, I think the difficulty with this is it just moves slightly too fast to be entirely comfortable. If you compare it to something like Gradius, then the pace of Gradius is a bit slower. Gives you a bit more time to get into position. And also, most of the enemies in this seem to take multiple hits to kill as well, which makes it a bit more difficult. Although, if you can get those early power-ups, as you can see, it's quite a bit easier. So we're on the level 3 of the base... Oh, shit. Level 2 of the basic bullets now. And that's already making things a bit easier just because it fires a bit quicker. I don't think the shots themselves are actually any more powerful, but just the fact that it fires more of them makes things a bit easier. One thing I always find quite interesting about this is the fact that sort of all the shots have a very definite rhythm to them. And sort of learning that rhythm and when best to use the different types of shot is sort of as important as learning the enemy attack patterns. Doing a bit better this time. Don't want to curse it, but so we're up to level 4 of this weapon and level 3 of this weapon now. So the second I start talking about the weapons is the time I lose one. There we go. One level down. Finally. There's no bosses or anything in this, so it's just a case of getting to the end of the level. And then you get a bonus based on how many of those B tokens you picked up. Now once you complete that first level, you can then choose where to go next. with the exception of the last 1, 2, 3, 4 levels, which you need to find tokens to be able to go into in the first place. Here we are. Like I said before, the oops. The different levels each have a different colour scheme. So this one, rather than being green, is brown. Now I'm dead. There we go. Right. So that's Zybex anyway. That's a good shoot 'em up, but it's a very difficult one. So you need a fair amount of patience to deal with that. But it's worth a look. And as I say, if you are more of a Commodore 64 fan than an Atari 8-bit fan, the Commodore 64 version is actually a little bit better than that. But the 8-bit version is still worth checking out. Right, what's next? Let's go for a real classic. Oh, you telling me Star Raiders doesn't work on this emulator? That's very disappointing if so. Okay. Let's try Star Raiders 2. Not as good, but still cool. Alright. Now, I was going to play Star Raiders because I was going to have a rant about how the 2600 version of that is the one that always gets in compilations again, but obviously we can't do that, so we're going to play the second version instead. Now this is quite an interesting game because it was originally intended to be a licensed game based on the movie The Last Starfighter, and in fact there is a prototype version of that out in the wild that is branded with The Last Starfighter, and it's very similar to this. With the main difference being that the cockpit is purple rather than grey, and some of the game structure is slightly different as well. Yeah, it's quite different to the original Star Raiders in that the original Star Raiders was kind of a take on the sort of classic Star Trek game in that you had a grid-based galactic map and you had to go from sector to sector and destroy all of the enemies that are in there. In the case of this one, however, we've got this kind of map here. And your job is to go from place to place, take out the enemies, and eventually head to the enemy star system and go and bomb the crap out of them, basically. So rather than just defending in this one, you have to go on the offense as well. This is another game I used to enjoy for its cockpit. Now, in the case of this one, it's actually less functional than the one in Rescue on Fractalus, in that there's a whole lot of stuff that is just there for no real good reason whatsoever. Like, look at all those screens in the bottom right. They are not doing anything useful whatsoever. But you do have things like, you've got your energy bar on the left-hand side. You've got the scanner in the middle. You've got the 2 gauges showing your laser temperatures. I don't think this is working properly in the emulator. That's unfortunate. Yeah, he's supposed to be shooting at me. Okay, that's a real shame. Okay, I won't spend any more time in that if it's not working completely properly. But suffice to say, Star Raiders 2 is a really good game, and you should give it a go if you have access to original hardware, or apparently a better emulator than I've got. Okay, let's find something else. Alright, this is another old Activision one. This is Keystone Capers. This is one that was originally on the Atari 2600. But again, the Atari 8-bit version was enhanced in various ways. Although actually less obviously than in other cases. In this case it's mostly just a case of better graphical detail. It's got most of the same features in both versions. Now, for the unfamiliar, this is a typical game of cops and robbers. So your job as the policeman is to catch the criminal while avoiding all the stuff that is out to get you. I believe the setting's supposed to be a department store or something like that, hence the elevators and escalators and so on. So there's the criminal. So if we can just get the elevator to come to the right place. It may have miscalculated. Alright, we can still catch him. Except we're going to run out of time. Alright, try again. So this is one of those sort of non-violent games. No one dies in this. You just lose time if you hit something. Come on. And you'll see on the scanner at the bottom, if you as soon as you show up on the same level as the criminal, he will turn around and bugger off in the opposite direction, just to be irritating. Oh, time again. Jeez. This game is a lot harder than I remember. Especially jumping over those bastards. I feel like we're going to run out of time again. Quick. Oh, damn it. Let's try this approach. is you actually run faster than the criminal, so you can catch up with him. So it's a case of plotting the most effective route to be able to get to him without making him run away. There we go. Looks like the same tactic might work on this level as well. Let's give it a try. I'm not quite sure what those things were supposed to be. I think they're radios, but I don't really know why they're obstacles. But then why does anything happen? Why are pink yo-yos obstacles as well? There we go, now we're cooking. Yes, I remember those shopping carts being assholes. I always like the policeman sprite in this. I thought he had a lot of character despite not really having a face. Just the way he stands, the way he runs is just very... It's very sort of traditional Bobby. It's like he's very determined and serious about what he does. I feel we may have discovered an exploit for this game already. Seems to be getting easier, not harder. My friend Chris is excited about the new Overwatch character. We'll have to have a look at that in a moment. Haven't played Overwatch for ages, but you know, I appreciate the character design and the lore and so on. I just don't really enjoy playing it anymore. Something toxicity. I remember real problems jumping over those shopping carts and ducking under those aeroplanes when I played this as a kid, but it's actually pretty easy. The only ones that were really giving me grief are those bouncy things. My time is getting a bit tight on this one. You're nicked. Oh, it's just like waiting for a real lift. Not confident I'm going to make it in time this time. But let's give it a go. He's already up on the roof, so... Oops, that's not going to help. Tits. Man, it's really not going to help. That will do. Oh, bollocks. Right, this time. Oh well, that's that. Anyway, that's Keystone Capers. A questionable classic by Activision. Right, what's next? Oops, that's not how you spell that. Alright, this is a game that was originally called Landscape and then got rebranded to Stealth for some reason. When I was a kid, I had the prototype version that was called Landscape. I'm not entirely sure what the differences are, to be honest. But the basic concept is you're trying to get to that tower in the background. Ooh, excuse me. And along the way, you're trying to shoot stuff. Oh, sorry. We have a coughing fit going on there. That's what 3 hours without a drink will do for you. So anyway, as I was saying, the aim of this game is to get to that tower in the background. You see there's a there's a distance counter in the bottom right. It shows you how far you got to go. And along the way, you have to destroy stuff. Yeah, good plan, eh? I think I might just do that. Give me a sec. I will pause it and I will be right back. Right. Armed with sweet fluids. Also, hello. Thank you for stopping by. So, like I was saying, this is a game that was originally called Landscape. It's a sort of 3D flying game. The aim is to reach that tower in the background and destroy it, blasting things along the way. There's a sort of certain degree of energy management along the way as well. So you've got the energy counting down in the corner, and that goes down every time you shoot and over time as well. So you can restore that by flying through some of those fuzzy energy gate type things. It's only the sort of light orange coloured ones that restore you though. The other ones you need to try and destroy. So you fly through that, you get some energy back. So in some ways it's a little bit like sort of River Raid, which we looked at earlier, in that you've got to sort of manage your fuel levels as well as avoiding things, shooting things, that kind of thing. I always used to like this one for the sort of pseudo 3D effect it did, so where the tower gets bigger as you approach it and so on. Going to run out of energy before we get there, I think. Oh, there we go. Right, last life. Oh no, game over. I'll try that again without the coughing fit this time. Right. So it's actually kind of in your interest to try and avoid stuff rather than shoot it, because every shot you take is taking away some of that precious energy. So if you try and plot a route that is on the right track, that minimises the amount of shooting you need to do and takes you through some of those energy gates. There we go, going much better this time. Amazing what a few fluids will do for you. Yeah, this is a game I always used to really like as a kid for a few reasons, really, because it was sort of about that time that there were things like Sega's Afterburner and things were out in the arcades as well, and things like the sort of behind ship view in this used to remind me of that. I mean, obviously it's not anywhere near as advanced as that, but I always used to like this sort of design of spaceship or aircraft with the dual engines and that kind of thing, and it used to remind me of those games and make me feel a bit I was having that sort of arcade experience at home and that kind of thing. Which is good, because the home ports of Afterburner were absolute garbage. So when the Atari ST era finally came around and we got that, and the only really redeeming feature of the Atari ST version of Afterburner was the amazingly 90s sort of digitized song that came on the loading screen. Which had nothing to do with the actual game, of course. As with a lot of things in that particular era of gaming, there was stuff added just to show off for no apparent reason. It was like, look, we can do digitized sound. Drink pause, excuse me. No, I don't think I heard of that one. I actually didn't have an NES. So my first console, which we'll be coming up to in the next hour or so, was the Super NES. So I didn't really sort of get to... Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't really get to know the NES until much later, because I had some friends at high school who had an NES as well as the Super NES as well. So that gave me the opportunity to sort of try a few of those games for the first time. So in sort of my early days of gaming, I was very much a computer gamer. So hence the stuff like this. I often tried to sort of emulate the console experience but without the sort of dedicated gaming hardware, it was kind of difficult to do. Yeah, there we go. Finally done it. Then you get to do it all again. In a slightly different colour. I think there's a few additional enemy types as well. Ugh. I do apologise about all the coughing. I'm coming off like 3 weeks of a cold and a short bout of tonsillitis as well. So I was hoping I'd be alright for today, but apparently I need to cut down on the talking a little bit. Yeah, so we got a few extra enemy types on this one. So we got those green things popping up now as well, which I think move and shoot at you. Oops. Obviously, still got those fighters as well. I used to think they look like half-eaten biscuits. No. So I think the other reason I enjoyed this was it was sort of one of a few sort of 3D games, if you like, in this kind of genre. A lot of shoot 'em ups at the time were very much either top-down or side-scrolling ones. I just found it a lot more interesting to have it unfolding from behind the aircraft. All right, anyway, so that's that. Let's move on to something else. What have we got? Alright, so this one is a game that came out on all sorts of things. It was an arcade game originally, I think. But I remember this one pretty fondly because it was something that pretty much our whole family enjoyed. It was like, even my mum played this, and my mum wasn't a big game player, but she always used to like this one for some reason. I also used to quite like it because it reminded me of Dig Dug, and the version of Dig Dug we had on our Atari never used to work properly, so this was sort of the closest I could get to playing it on our computer. Oh dear. And it's a simple game, it's a really simple idea, but it works really well. And it's got some nice level design, some nice music. And the way the colour scheme changed from level to level, it's a really simple thing, but it gave each level a very distinct feeling. I didn't notice until much later that sort of the default pattern that was carved into the level at the beginning was actually the number of the level that you were playing. This is a series that actually ran for quite a long time, I think. If I remember rightly, there were actually either some remakes or some sequels with the Neo Geo in the end, which was sort of quite a bit later than these original games came out. Neo Geo, unfortunately, is one of those systems. I never quite got emulation running properly for that, but I have a friend who sent me a suggested setup that I need to try at some point. Right, let's try that again without messing up quite so much. That's more like it. Oh, you bugger. I was kind of like the musical thing that was going on in this as well. As I was playing this at sort of the time I was first starting to learn the piano and learn about scales and things like that, so sort of hearing scales used in a creative way like this to sort of demonstrate how you were doing in a game was always something that I kind of liked. And the idea of music being incorporated into gameplay is something I still really like today, so a puzzle game I covered on my site a few days ago called Gunpei, that's got really nice use of music in it. The same as Luminous, that's a really nice game as well. And then there's obviously stuff like Rez, which is a shoot 'em up that uses music along the way, and Chime, which is another puzzle game, makes heavy use of music. This is, I think, the earliest example I can think of a game actually incorporating music into its sound effects. Oh no! Right, enough Mr. Do for now. Or is it? So this is Mr. Do's castle, which doesn't have a lot to do with Mr. Do, apart from having Mr. Do in it. But I used to like this one. It's a similar idea to sort of stuff like Load Runner and Apple Panic and such like. You've got a hammer you can hit blocks with, knock things out, and you can knock enemies down though through those holes and so on. In this case, sort of an important part of the game is knocking things down onto enemies from above. I always like this one because I thought it was like an interesting take on the single screen platformer, in that you couldn't jump was the main thing. You just had this hammer to be able to do stuff with. How do I get that one? Can you reach it from there? There we go. I'm not quite sure what those enemies were supposed to be. They always reminded me of pigs, I think. I don't know if that's what they're supposed to be or not, but... Uh-oh. This was unwise. Oh, fortunately that one's quite stupid. Oh, where are they gone blue? And they're gone really fast. I guess that's the good old panic mechanic. Oh, that one's green. Uh-oh. Oh. Okay. It's getting noticeably harder now. Nope. That was just incompetent, though. As was that. Oh no. No Pac-Man problem in this. He's getting pincer attacks by everything. I'll probably try and kill some of them, I guess. Let's get rid of the nasty green one. And now I'm dead. Alright. So, Mr. Do. Right, what else did I have on the list? Alright, here's another classic that came out on pretty much everything. This is the Atari 8-bit version of Lode Runner. So I believe there are actually two versions of this. There's a colour version and this sort of black and white one. It's the version I've got on my actual physical Atari system is the colour one. And although it looks a little bit better, it's actually slightly harder to see what's going on. Just because the colour kind of obscures the detail a bit. I quite like the sort of minimalist look this one's got going on. Uh-oh. I'm also bad at Lode Runner. It's another single screen platform in which you can't jump. Your main sort of means of defense in this one is digging holes to trap the enemies in. The thing I always found pretty interesting about this one, though, is that the enemies are actually surprisingly intelligent in this. Oh, that was idiotic. I, on the other hand, am not. Yeah, if you watch their movements, they're actually pretty smart in terms of anticipating what you're likely to do based on your position and so on. And I mean, obviously that's not saying much in a game of this type, which is pretty simple and straightforward, but it is noticeable when you compare it to the number of games out there that just had enemies that just blindly move back and forth on set paths. But in this one, for example, they'll see you going up a ladder and they'll sort of anticipate that you're likely to end up on that platform. So you see the guy turn around halfway through, climbing across the rope in the middle there. There's also some really interesting puzzle aspects to the levels in it, so you have to make sure you don't get trapped and that sort of thing. So if you look over on the left hand side of this level, for example, there's that box that's sort of trapped beneath 2 layers of blocks. And in order to get to that, you've got to be really careful about the order in which you dig down through them, otherwise you'll end up just trapping yourself. And obviously you've got the enemies to deal with in the meantime as well. So you just need to try and delay them as much as possible. So the way we deal with this bit is you dig 2 squares wide like that, which gives you space to dig another square like that, and then grab like that. Because if you dig just 1 square, you'll fall into the hole and you've got no room to move, you've got no room to actually put that extra hole in, because you can't dig directly under yourself. So this is one of those games that's been remade and ported and all sorts of things hundreds and hundreds of times. This is the original release of it from back in 1983, I think. There's actually been a recent re-release of the game on Steam even that uses voxel graphics, which is entirely the right thing to do for this kind of game. It all being block based and digging stuff out and that kind of thing. And that new release has got a bunch of new levels, but I believe it's got the levels from the original game in it as well. So there were 150 levels in the original game, which is a lot even for that time, even though they're just single screen platformer things like this. And of course, with this being the age of user-generated content and stuff, the new version's got things like a level editor and stuff in it as well. If I remember rightly, I think the original version of Load Runner actually shipped with a level editor as well, so you could make your own levels and put them on disk. Obviously, with no internet at the time, you'd have to actually sort of physically give those levels to someone for them to be able to play them. In a way, I kind of missed that because it was sort of a much more social and personal way to sort of share new content and things that you'd done in the game, but at the same time, it was often quite difficult to find someone who owned the same games as you and thus was willing to actually give them a go. So that's always been the case with stuff where you couldn't share things online. So a really good example I can think of is SSI did a package called Unlimited Adventures. It was basically a construction kit for their Dungeons and Dragons games. So it was a means of making your own role-playing games, but the problem with it was, in order to actually play the adventures you made, you needed a copy of Unlimited Adventures. There wasn't like a means of building a standalone executable with them. And so that kind of reduced a lot of the value for it for me, because I didn't know anyone else who had a copy of Unlimited Adventures, so therefore I couldn't really build an adventure for anyone unless I wanted to sort of pirate the disc for them, which I didn't really want to do, even though it was a pretty widespread practice and everyone did it, and you know, but all the same I felt a bit bad. Oops. I say I felt a bit bad. I mentioned at the start of this that the vast majority of games that people got in this era of computing were probably on pirated discs. And I was a bit young to attend it at the time, but my dad and my brother used to go to a local computer club that was mostly people swapping pirated discs, from what I could make out. So we've got a huge library of software for the actual physical original Atari 8-bit computers, including some really rare stuff and prototype games and that sort of thing that have found their way into the hands of these computer club members at some point, but they're all copies. I've got about, I think, 5 or 6 original Atari 8-bit games, and the rest is all just on copied discs. And that was not at all unusual at the time. I've spoken with friends who from sort of across the pond who had Commodore 64s and that kind of thing as well, and he said, yeah, it was just a done thing to sort of swap discs in the playground and that sort of thing, and exchange games and copy games for each other. I remember there being big advertising campaigns at the time about, oh, you shouldn't pirate games and so on, just because it was such a widespread practice at the time. You think we have problems now with people cracking things and putting them online and so on. It's like it was the norm rather than just something nerds on the internet did back then. One thing I do like about this game is how much mobility you have, even though you can't jump. You've got a lot of choices of how to get around though. So like you can, there's no fall damage or death from falling like there was in Minor that we looked at earlier. But so you can do things like you can dig a hole in a platform and fall down through it, and you can sort of jump off ladders part way up. There's the ropes you can sort of climb across. You fill in the hole with the enemy and walk across their head. I guess that's why this is such a well-regarded game, because it's a well-designed platform game with some pretty fiendish puzzles. So we got another multi-layer one here, so we need to be careful. See there, I've caught myself, so I can't get back up, can't dig my way out. So, error. How the hell do you do that? Come on, kill me. Have I broken the game? I think I might have broken the game. Oh well, that was ending that with a bit of a whimper, but there we go, that's Load Runner. Right. Checking my schedule. I think it's almost time to change over for the next batch of things. So, I have to go offline for a brief moment while I change devices, as I will now be streaming from an actual console rather than just using my computer. But I will be back in just a couple of moments with some Super NES games. So I shall see you in a moment.